Okay, and with that, Kevin, we can sure get started. I think we have a great presence. So whenever you're ready.
I've been ready. I've been excited about this for a week now, a couple of weeks, knowing that, hearing that it was going to be canceled. I'm sure everybody's like, oh no. But then all of a sudden everybody's like, wait, we still want to be able to have this discussion. And all of the speakers too, we were like, we really want to have this discussion too. So we are glad to have you all here. Want to welcome you all. Want to remind you too, we are also being recorded. So you can go to that speaker view, but we are also being recorded during today's session. And as questions come up, please, please, please don't let us go on without answering your questions today. Put them in the chat and we'll address those questions. I, by the way, am Kevin Olson. I am known as the Payments Professor. I do a lot of things with making payments fun and exciting, which is an easy job because payments are fun and exciting. You may also know that I am also the Senior Vice President for Payment Solutions at Vsoft, and that's where I get to be able to work hands-on with payments because, gosh, I do love my payments. Now, I have been joined by an incredible, I would even say the superheroes of payments are here to join me today. Now, this panel has been assembled like the Avengers to come together to answer everything you need to know when it comes to faster payments. Now, just who do we have in the panel? Let's start off with, how about Brian? Brian, would you please introduce yourself to everybody?
Brian Lavender. Some people also know me as Clark Kent. I have had that nickname for quite some time. But no, I'm Brian Lavender, Vice President of Payments and Technology Policy at ICBA, coming to you live from the beautiful upstate of South Carolina. Very much excited to be here to talk to you all about faster payments and the capabilities that they'll be bringing to community banks.
And he's definitely a superhero of payments. He's going to be able to represent those community banks. Looking forward to hearing what you're going to have to say today, Brian. Welcome. Glad to have you here. All right, let's go on and move. Now, what I'm doing is I actually have a rhyme and reason to this, is I'm randomly picking somebody. So I'm going to go ahead. How about Kim? Kim, would you please introduce yourself to everybody?
Great. Good morning, Kevin, and hello, everyone. I'm Kim Robbins. I am the Chief of Enterprise Services for the Federal Reserve's Federal Reserve Financial Services. Previously, I had been the Chief Administrative Officer for FedNow, so still have a foot in that camp as well. But I'm very excited to be here today and talk to you about everything we're going to discuss. Looking forward to it.
So the Fed is in the house. All right. We know the Fed's got a lot going on with faster payments, but they're not the only ones that have something going on with faster payments. Steve, could you tell us who you are and who you represent and what that means to the world of faster payments?
Absolutely. Steve Ledford. I'm with the Clearinghouse. I'm the Senior Vice President, Payments and Strategy. And in particular, I'm the product executive for the RTP network. And, very happy to talk about what it is we're doing.
Okay, this is going to be exciting. Now we got one more. Reed, who are you? What do you do? And who do you represent?
Boy, that is a loaded question. Reed Lutanen, I'm the Executive Director at the U.S. Faster Payments Council. Many of you might be familiar with the FPC, but just really quickly, the FPC is an industry-led membership organization, and our vision is a world-class payment system where Americans can safely and securely pay anyone, anywhere, at any time, and with near immediate funds availability. In the way the FPC activates that is with the diverse group of stakeholders in work groups. So I thought it might be helpful to kind of talk about some of those work group efforts a little bit and kind of set the stage a little bit, if that's okay with you, Kevin.
You guys ready? We're getting started now. This is where it begins. All right, Reed.
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit what's happening with those work groups? Let's get this party started.
Yeah. So we've got a number of active work groups, in fact, 7, and they work on providing educational materials for our members and for the industry at large, and also collaborating to solve problems in the industry and to help activate and break down some of those barriers that are preventing maybe the adoption or the usage of faster and instant payments in the US. So the topics that they're working on include things like directory models, cross-border transactions, financial inclusion, recurring payments, and fraud. So things that are either going to be very informative to people who are thinking about instant payments, or also things that might help, like I said, activate or catalyze adoption and usage of faster payments going forward.
Okay, that's some exciting stuff you just mentioned. Again, folks, if you heard all of that, or if you're wondering about the FPC, Faster Payments Council, remember, you've got that chat, you've got your voice, you can ask questions at any time. That's actually one of the benefits of the virtual world. You're able to put all that stuff out there. So I heard directories, I'm actually taking notes here, cross-border, recurring, and did you say fraud?
I did.
Wait, what's happening as far as fraud and fraud prevention tools that the FPC is working on?
Yeah, so that's one of the efforts that was one of the very first things that the founding members of the FPC identified as obviously critical for the adoption and usage of faster payments is understanding and being able to mitigate the occurrence of fraud through these new types of payment systems. So that group first last year put out a white paper that gets into what are some of the differences in how fraud is happening in instant payments, being that it's a push payment type transaction instead of a debit. What are the vectors that are sort of being used to attack that type of payment? So thinking about things like authorized push payment scams and things like that. So, and now the work group after that first paper is now in the midst of a survey where they're going to go out and they're going to try to get some quantitative numbers on what's happening in the marketplace today. What are some of the mitigation techniques that are actually being used by folks who are participating in these networks? And that will not only obviously be a really useful source of data for us all to sort of get a picture and understanding of what's happening in the marketplace, but also it's going to inform next steps in terms of what are the things that ought to be looked at and worked on at the FPC and maybe other places as well.
Okay, that's great. Now you mentioned the white paper. I want to make sure for our attendees, if they're interested in getting that paper, where do they go? That's on your website, is that correct?
Absolutely, at fasterpaymentscouncil.org. If you go to the Knowledge Center and the resources, you can find that and lots of other deliverables, and many of them are available for public folks who aren't FPC members, including that fraud one.
All right, and as this party's getting started and the plane's starting to take off here and we're gaining altitude again, yeah, if you got any questions, here to serve you are going to be Sheila and Donna. So anything that we don't capture, you can always go to them, and I know they'll be glad to be able to help you. Now, on the topic of fraud, let's go ahead and let's get somebody else out here, because you mentioned authorized push payments, and I call that, are you down with APP? Well, we don't want to be down with APP. We want to be able to stop the fraud and we want to stop the scam. So when it comes to being down with APP, how do we stop that in RTP? So Steve, what is available when it comes to fraud mitigation and things that are happening over at the clearinghouse in the RTP world? What do you guys have?
Well, yeah, first of all, and I think that one of the things that Reed just said is very important. What you do with a credit transfer, a push payment, is going to be different than what you do with debits. The first thing you need to do is make sure that only folks who really are who they say they are initiating payments. And so that really goes down to strong upfront authentication of your customer. We require it. One of the things that we do is realize that that's going to be different depending on whether it's a commercial, small business, or retail, whether it's using an API or using maybe a browser or mobile. And so the idea is adapt, but make sure you're doing those kinds of things. Some of the other things that are important to do is just good monitoring of the transactions. You need to look for things that your customers are doing that are different from what they would normally do. So if I've never made a $10,000 payment to Kevin Olson, and all of a sudden I start making $10,000 payments to Kevin Olson, you're probably going to wonder why, and make sure this really is Steve Ledford and not Kevin Olson, not accusing you of anything.
Can we go ahead and make that payment just to see what happens?
Let's try it out. Yeah, we'll do a proof of concept on this. So those are some of the basics there. But some of the other things that have been successful, especially around the world where folks have more experience, is when someone's making a payment, just ask them a few questions. They have a program in the UK called Take 5, which is before you hit send, take 5 and make sure you absolutely know this. And we're seeing folks doing things like customers making a payment says, by the way, we noticed this is a new payee. Is this someone that you met online? Do you really know them? Are they trying to sell you a nice puppy and you have no idea where it's coming from? Those kinds of things. Those can be remarkably effective. So some of the thoughts, sometimes it's just reminding your customers to do the smart thing. The good news is we've actually had very, very low fraud on the RTP network so far. We're not getting cocky. We know that the bad guys are out there. And what do bad guys want to do? They want to get your money. So we're going to continuously, we require that all fraudulent activity be reported to the network so that we can understand it and try to make sure we're getting ahead of it. Mostly by advising the banks that are on the network, here's the way you can, here's what you need to be doing or what's going on. Just make sure that your customers aren't being victimized.
All right, that's great. Great stuff to hear because we know you're out there. We know you're doing things right away. I love that you mentioned a puppy. I mean, I wish I could see by a raise of hands. Is there anybody out there that got a COVID puppy? All right, because I did. And in the process, my mother almost fell for some of those schemes that are out there.
Yeah.
So anybody, it can happen to anybody. And it's scary to even see what's going on out there. What else is going on out there, though, is we know that the Fed's coming out with a solution. And Kim, what are some of the fraud tools and controls the Fed already has in works and is planning on being able to have available when it comes to FedNow?
Yeah, Kevin, great question. And I want to double down on a couple comments that Reed said too. I think they're really thematic for the stage we're at with an instant payment. So he used two words, educate and activate. And I love those two words. And I love that the FSPC has been at the helm for a while in driving that education and activating around the key topics that we know are so crucial to the implementation of instant payments in the United States. Key to kind of our success. So when you think about the mission of the Fed, our mission in payments, accessibility, efficiency, and safety. And so fraud is essential to the safety of the payments ecosystem. We've heard from folks starting all the way back from the Federal Register notices and when we sought public comment on what does faster payments and instant payments need to look like in the United States? And fraud was a key element from the beginning on making sure that we were doing something in that space. We have a pilot program today that has over 120 participants. The activity there and the interest has been overwhelmingly positive, and we're so thrilled to see that engagement from the industry. That group is in an advisory stage that has been critical to advising what should that roadmap look like for fraud, and how do we think about the initial rollout, and how do we think about progressing the fraud tools that we will deliver within the FedNow service. So at launch, you can expect reporting, you can expect control of transaction volume limits, there will be a capability to, at a specific account level, set different volume limits as well. So that's the start. But as I said, as new use cases evolve and as we continue to hear from the industry and think about the opportunities, we'll evolve what those fraud prevention controls will look like.
Okay, wow. I'm still on educate and activate. I'm thinking, you know, as far as superheroes, Wonder Twin powers, activate. All right, you're going to educate people. You're going to make sure you're activating these controls. Everything's out there. Real quick, I want to give the panel one more chance before we change gears here because, you know, we're up now. We're moving. We've got this flight and this journey taking place. Anything else on those fraud and risk controls that you'd like to mention before we start changing topics? Anybody raise your hand and I'll let you know. And again, those of you out there, this is your chance to be able to ask any questions you got about fraud, managing those risks, what can be done. It is definitely a scary environment. Reed, thank you. You put up there to everyone where they can go and be able to find that white paper if they want to be able to learn and discuss more. I know MIB, you guys are going to have some fraud controls and probably some best practices that are in place. Everybody can come to you if there's anything out there. And I'm going to quit babbling now. I'm not seeing anybody wanting to raise their hand, add any more to it, or any questions coming in, because now it's time to figure out, how do I fit in? What do you mean I need faster payments? Where am I actually going to use these faster payments? Now, you guys out there, watch this. This is going to be fun. We're going to now have a discussion on use cases. If that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what will. So use cases. How are the use cases going to be for working with faster payments? Now, Kim, I know you just unloaded a lot, and you know you've got that green tea in you though, so you got this energy. I know it. I know how that works. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the use cases that FedNow is currently looking at and saying, we know this will work. We know that the industry is going to want this. We know that it's going to be effective. So what are some of the things where we know FedNow is going to fit into the world of payments, especially faster payments?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kevin. I like to think about the possibilities that will be, and that can open your mind and open the opportunities for things that I don't even think we're considering yet. And I think, you know, that's the future. But let's talk about the present. Let's talk about what will Fed now. What are the use cases that we're considering right out of the gate? So again, in advisement with the industry and advisement with the pilot participants, initially out of the gate, we'll be focused on account-to-account transfers and also bill payment. We absolutely understand the essentialness of P2P, and that will be a fast follower, but really enabling that account to count and again that bill payment capability are kind of top of mind for us with the launch, you know, with the general availability launch in 2023. So but as I said, I think that when you think about you know, reimagining the supply chain, you think about reimagining payroll in different cases, there are so many opportunities. And I think the key is let's get it out there, and then let's have the rest of the ecosystem contribute to enabling some of those use cases as well.
Steve, I see you getting excited over there with some use cases. All right. I'm watching you. But before we get to you, one of the things I want to do is I want to go ahead and say, Reed, you mentioned recurring payments. That was another one of your work groups that you had out there that you'd mentioned. And as far as use cases, I know recurring is a big one, but could you tell us, are there others, or could you even give us a little bit more insight into those recurring payments?
Oh, absolutely. There are tons of others. And I don't want to steal too much of Steve's thunder there. I will circle back to that because I wanted to talk about recurring for sure. And I think one thing to think about there is, you know, you might be thinking about recurring in terms of like, you know, your Netflix or things like that are like $15 every single month, the same amount. And setting up a process by which you could push those out through an RTP or FedNow transaction could be super convenient for you from a understanding where your funds are at any given moment perspective, right? And that certainty associated with it. But in order to do that, you've got to have all those things in place in terms of how do I as a consumer actually make that happen, right? So who are the technology companies in between maybe the retailer and the consumer and their financial institutions in the middle, but who are these other folks who are help connecting those dots? And how do we make that all a seamless experience that's common across different use cases, all of which are recurring, right? So if you're doing Netflix here and maybe your insurance premium, not premium, you know what I mean, your insurance bill every month too, those things are going to be super convenient for people if it can be consistent. But the other thing to keep in mind here is that recurring doesn't have to always be the same amount every time, right? It could be maybe your electric bill, that's a recurring bill, but it's not the same amount every month. At least mine isn't. And I think there are things like that people are also going to be interested in. How can I make it set up so I can just automatically pay that, maybe within certain tolerances? Maybe there are different things that people are going to want to do in terms of how they customize that. But it can really make it a lot simpler for people to sort of go about their daily lives. And that's really what we're talking about here, that there is going to be demand for that kind of thing. I mean, some of the other use cases out there, there's lots, and I know Steve's probably going to talk about a number of these, but gig economy, you know, Kim mentioned payroll, but how do you do those sort of ad hoc payments to your, you know, to the Uber drivers and the folks who are, you know, delivering all the things that we've been getting delivered in terms of restaurant meals, since none of us have gone to a restaurant in the last 18 months. You know, it's really endless. And I think and something Kim touched on, and I'm going to filibuster here a little bit, is that I really believe there are use cases that we aren't thinking about because there are businesses that don't yet exist that will exist because this is something that enables them to work in a way that makes sense and be efficient. And so I think there's things that can come to, kind of like when the internet came into existence, new business models were created that were revolving around the internet. I think the same thing is going to be true of instant payments down the road.
Well, you know, we don't know what we don't know, you know? And that is so absolutely true. And a lot of things you hit on is, first of all, I should be keeping score for every use case that comes up, because we've had A to A, P2P, B2B, bill pay, gig, Uber, ad hoc, Netflix, electric payments, all kinds of things that are out there. We've even got a question that's coming in, and I'm going to definitely make sure that we do get to that question appropriately. Right now, I want to stay on the topic of use cases. And if you've got some use cases out there, you're wondering if it would fit in, put those in the chat too, just like the question that we just saw come in. Put those questions out there. Let us know, hey, would it work for this? Would it work for that? Because where it is already working, and somebody who can tell us a lot about where they're already using use cases is going to be Steve. And Steve, I know when it comes to use cases, you could probably talk for the rest of the time we have, but where are you at on use cases? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, first of all, I think that what Reed just said about or was it you, it said about the internet is absolutely right. By the way, the original purpose for the World Wide Web was to disseminate scholarly research papers. They did not mention at all cat videos, but doggone it, we have way more cat videos than we have scholarly research being disseminated on the internet today. And that's the way I look at it. When we went back a number of years ago, when we were planning the RTP network, we made our projections of what the big use cases would be. And right now, if you look at what I would say, like the 3 or 4 top use cases we have on the network today, none of them were in what we saw as our top 10 group. Kim mentioned account to account transfers, and that's huge. And sometimes it's like my account at one bank to maybe a savings account at another, or maybe a brokerage account. Sometimes it's, maybe from a digital wallet I have and I want the money in my checking account, that type of thing. But those have been really big since the very beginning. Payroll. Who knew you would be able to say, I want to get paid for the shift that I just clocked out of and get that right now? That's a huge use case. Merchant settlement. I've been getting a bunch of card payments all day and I want to get my money. That's another one that's really much bigger than we thought. And so I think it's one of the things to keep in mind is, as smart as we as payments nerds think we are, we don't know what the end customer is going to find to be the most compelling thing. But what we can do is put solutions in front of them that let them decide. So I think, Kim, you were right on in terms of let's get it out there and folks will use it. One of the great things about it is this has been a great education on how commerce in America works. I did not know a darn thing about how factoring worked until we launched this network. I'm now learning more about factoring in various different industries because factors have learned this is a good way of putting money in folks' hands earlier. And that same goes for some of the working capital lending and things like that. We're learning about the very complicated and sometimes convoluted ways that B2B payments are being made, because when all of a sudden the world shut down and folks couldn't get into their offices to cut checks, they had to find electronic ways of paying. And luckily RTP was able to fit the bill in many cases. And so I think that it's probably just as important to think, if I'm a banker, what are the kinds of ways I can help my customers really figure out how to do payments that fit their unique needs as a business? That's going to be important. So one of the things we've done recently is when we've been working with folks trying to figure these kind of things out, we've been working on things like, okay, you have payroll, you have insurance disbursements, you might have these other things, but when it comes right down to it, there's going to be a product that enables that. Maybe it's, the ability to take a file for them. Maybe it's putting it in your commercial, portal. Maybe it's an API, something like that. Think in terms of what it is, and then how you can work with your customers to get the payments done for them and make it as easy as possible. They're going to be the ones that are very creative. And Reed mentioned the recurring payments. Very important. First of all, we realized, Reed, you're on the premium Netflix program, obviously. So, but the recurring payments were one of those things that we learned about as we started hearing from some of the corporate initiators of bill payments. What are some of the things they want? But we also heard about it on the retail side. My customers want to be able to say, you know what, this Netflix payment or whatever, we got this. We want to continue doing it. So we're working on ways to make that a little bit easier to do. So it's fascinating. If you ever want to learn a lot about how business is done, go and launch a payment system. It's a great education.
Yes, it is. Real quick, we're having some questions that are coming in. Thank you all for those questions. And I got to tell you too, Steve, my 10K hasn't showed up. So we might need to get the fraud department. We might need to revisit that topic real quick. In fact, a question that has come up is companies or solutions that might be out there working on the forefront of fraud and faster payments. Okay, guys, let's back up just for a second here. And the question is, are there specific companies? Are there solutions that are in the works that will help or be on the forefront really of what's happening in faster payments? Are there maybe solution providers that we know that are out there and available? Is there advice that we could give to this person, to the whole group, on what they should do as far as the companies and the solutions that are out there for working with fraud and faster payments? I'm going to go a little bit crazy here and say, who wants it?
Kevin, I'll jump in here. I guess my suggestion would be, we could probably name some specific companies here, but I don't know that that would be as useful as suggesting that folks reach out to contacts like your banker's bank, like Sheila, reach out to, check on the FPC. Actually, one thing that I think we're gonna talk about this a little bit later, but we're actually in the process of putting together a solution provider catalog for people who can, so you can go there and you can access that. You can say, oh, well, I'm a bank, I'm looking for a solution around fraud. And it would then provide you with lots of information about different companies that can help you there, or with whatever your question is, whatever you're looking to solve in terms of the different necessary enabling capabilities to bring it online for your organization. So I think it's more about thinking about how do you find the resources that can provide you with a full list of options, not just one or two companies that the folks here might mention.
So if I heard you right, it's really getting the conversation started. It's going to some of your trusted resources like MIB, going out to the Faster Payments Council, and it's having the conversation with them. In some cases too, it's talking to your own providers that you're already working with to seeing what they might have available to be able to work with. Anybody else want to add to that? Anything else you would say?
Yeah, one of the things with faster payments, push payments, the most important thing is to stop fraud before someone hits the send button. And that's going to need to be built into whatever channel they are using to initiate the payment. And so one of the places I would definitely go is I would talk to whoever it is, whether it's something I built myself, or in most cases, it's going to be a product that you're using from one of the many financial technology vendors, your online banking service. Which is where you're likely to be actually doing things like the account to account transfers or the bill payments, especially if they're against a request for payment, or your online commercial or small business. Look at how they're building it in, because what you don't want to do is just bolt anti-fraud onto a solution. You want to see that it's been brought into the solution. And so also, you're all already subject to FFIEC guidance on how to prevent fraud, the multi-factor and that kind of thing. So you're probably doing a lot of things already. Make sure that what you're doing is attuned to what you need for faster payments. And I think that the white paper that Reed mentioned and some of the other stuff coming out of that anti-fraud initiative, by the way, it is an anti-fraud initiative, not a fraud initiative at FBC, will be helpful. But the thing to think about is always think about preventing fraud from that customer's point of view. And the earlier you can do something to prevent them from making a mistake, or prevent someone who says they are them actually making that payment, the more likely you are going to be able to prevent the fraud. And there are a lot of solution providers that they are able to plug into the various solutions, or they're built into the solution. That's where you really need to be starting, because it's not what's frauds out there in the world, it's what's relevant to you as a banker trying to help your customers initiate payments.
Y'all remember that Tom Cruise movie where they would show up and arrest you before you committed a crime? I can't remember the title of it. It's escaping me right now, but I want that fraud solution. I want the fraud solution that shows up and says, you're about to send money that you shouldn't send. We're not going to let you. Oh, but we can't really do that, can we? We got to let them have some decisions. But boy, wouldn't it be great to have something that would know in advance? So great discussion on that for whoever asked that question, because we're going to let you remain anonymous if you'll just ask the questions. We're not going to call you out. If you need more on that, or if that spawned more questions, let me know, because I want to jump back over into that world of use cases. Because one of the things, Steve, that you said that actually got me thinking in there was you started talking about products. And when we look at products, we look at services, that means you got to have some tools. That means you got to have processes in place to be able to serve those use cases. And I know that the Clearinghouse, I know that the Faster Payments Council, I know you guys have worked on some things to help bridge that gap between, here's our products, here's our services, here's our tools, here's our processes. So Reed, Steve, could you guys enlighten us a little bit more on what it really means for products, what it means for services, and what's required of us to make this happen?
Sure. First of all, at the clearinghouse, we don't do the end user products. We're not selling, for example, bill pay. We're not selling, a commercial payment initiation. We have a core network, but we realize how important that is. We also realize that most banks out there are not in a position where they're going to be building these things from scratch. They're going to be working with folks who have tools. So in addition to working very closely with the financial institutions, as well as very closely with folks who are helping, like MIB, the role played by banks is very important in all this as well. We also work with some of the folks who are providing that technology to the financial institutions, because, as I mentioned before, that's actually where you enable your customers to make the payments. So we have a group of folks who their primary job is to work with those third parties, even if they're not connecting to the RTP network, they're going through the various banks and such, making sure that they know how to build the products, what's going to work, that type of thing. And that's been a great relationship, really in a number of ways, not only helping them build out the products, but helping them streamline the way they do it in a way that makes it easier both for them to implement, but most importantly, for their clients to implement. So a lot of there's no magic answer to it. It's just a lot of rolling up your sleeves and having the resources and time to work through and help people take these great ideas they have and turn them into reality.
Yeah, I like that. So a lot of it is definitely working, again, back to your trusted partners, people like MIB that are there to help you, support you, identifying what you want to be able to do and what you can do. Reed, is there anything else that you would add to that about the tools, the products, the services, and what can be done?
Yeah, what I was going to add is it's how do you make this work, but I think also how do you have the right conversations with the right people, right? So connecting all the different folks in the room to have okay, we got a business that has an idea, we have a network that can make that happen, but we need people in between to help knit it all together. But we need to have that conversation as a group so that we're not missing something, right? So that we're not building a solution that then doesn't have the right elements to send a transaction through the network that we want to use, or we're not building a solution that doesn't actually meet the needs of the user we're trying to work with. So I think collaborating across all the different segments that are interested in this thing is the critical aspect that I think sometimes is sort of shortchanged in discussion when we talk about, we get right to solutioning without having that conversation, make sure we're hearing all the perspectives and bringing everybody along for that implementation that ultimately will occur. So I think that's critical. And then in terms of, products and services, I view the role of the FPC as trying to highlight what are the needs that are in the marketplace, how can we best serve those needs, and then helping in that way to then activate innovation in the private sector through solution providers, networks, et cetera.
Okay. Well, in just a second, we're going to get to, he's been quiet. He's our superhero of payments, up there, our Clark Kent, Brian. In just a second, I'm going to get to Brian to discuss some of the things that the ICBA has out there. But before, because we got this plane flying, we're cruising right along. We need to talk to the pilot though. Kim, when we look at the FedNow pilot program, what's happening there when it comes to looking at the tools, looking at the processes, looking at what can be done with the products and with the services?
Yeah, so I want to come back. I think this is a great conversation, and I think you can interpret what is a service and what is a product. You can, we all probably have our own interpretations of that. I look at FedNow as the plumbing. We always have the payment services that the Fed offers is the infrastructure that allows financial institutions to provide the products and the services to their end users and to their business consumers. So that's how I distinguish it. The pilot that we have now, as I mentioned, we have over 120 participants, and they span all of the processors, small community banks, large banks, mid-size, et cetera. And they are in that advisory phase. They are advising us in terms of service functionality, service features, and so on. And then as we move forward sometime next year, they'll move into active testing stage in that pilot as well. But I think the other thing that is really important to mention, given this conversation, is we also recognize that broader ecosystem, those outside the financial institution, community are really critical to engaging with, because it's the vendors and it's the products that they offer as well, both the financial institutions and those end users. And so we're exploring ways to engage in the best way with that ecosystem. They have until that we've solicited some input from that broader ecosystem. They have until later this year to determine who they will partner with from a financial institution perspective in order to be part of that pilot down the road. Because again, our FedNow service is only offered to financial institutions, but that broader ecosystem, this is a rapidly changing dynamic market. Everybody wants in. You said it earlier, payments is fun and exciting, and that's changed over the last several years. So you're seeing interest from so many different players, and trying to sort that, even for us, even for financial institutions, takes time and takes education and takes that engagement. And so that is on our radar, and I think that will be critical to helping financial institutions know how to navigate, how to work with your processors, whatever it may be. So looking forward, I think, to that next stage of the pilot, when we really seek some of that input from the broader ecosystem as well. I think it will unlock other possibilities down the road for financial institutions.
I like that, unlocking the possibilities and getting input from the ecosystem. I want to go ahead and say too, folks, MIB is part of the pilot program. If you want to get in this ecosystem, you want to have a voice, make sure you're getting to them and letting them know so that they can make sure that that's communicated to the Fed. The Fed's listening. That's just one key thing that's out there. Now, when it comes to back to let's activate and let's educate, and we got so much going on, Brian, we've had you sitting there. I know I've been watching you absorb all this information. One of the things I want to ask though, too, is because we're seeing a lot that's being done by these industry groups to help enable these experiences. And the question that's probably coming up for all these attendees is, what can we as community banks do? So Brian, what would you say to them? What advice do you have to offer here?
Community banks can do so much, right? Community banks are really the nation's financial bedrock. I mean, there's so many different statistics you could look at to support that. Whether it, the most recent statistic in terms of what community banks did with PPP. I mean, really, like, community banks are really at the heart of the nation's economy. And so looking at the new capabilities provided by all these new payment technologies, I mean, it's absolutely tremendous. There's so many ways in which these new technologies are going to help community banks do what they do best, and that is serve their customers. And, I considering, like, some of the remarks from Steve and from Kim and Reed, like you're hearing all these important words, ecosystem, all sorts of different parts. And, like, one thing we haven't really touched on just yet with this conversation, but it's really the need for a comprehensive payment strategy, right? Whether you're looking at something like FedNow or RTP, these systems don't exist in isolation. They exist within a much bigger and very dynamic ecosystem. And so it's really very important to be able to take that holistic view, because, whether it's, you're a bigger community bank or a smaller community bank, the solutions that you provide, they're going to come from a range of different systems, right? You've heard about the flavors of faster payments. These new systems that are coming online, they're not built to replace all that legacy infrastructure. You're still going to have ACH. You're still going to have same-day ACH. You still have people using cash, still have people using checks, right? But they are going to address some very specific inefficiencies and help to address, some issues that we have with some of the current payment systems and processes. But you need to be able to think about, well, when I adopt something new, how does it integrate with everything else? And so, you're starting to see a lot more banks take the approach of maybe appointing some sort of director of payment strategy, or maybe you want to take a committee approach. There's different ways in which to do it. But the really key message to take home is, if you don't have a strategy, now is the time to make one. And, ICBA is making all sorts of tools available to help community banks build out that foundation of a payment strategy. I know the Fed's got all sorts of resources. TCH has put out a lot. Reed's organization is doing a lot. So you have so many different ways to access information, but the important first step is to go to it, get those resources, start reading them. I think we've probably said the word educate or education probably like 100 times already so far this morning, but really like that is going to be like one of the most essential things to do. There's going to be a lot of homework, but it's going to pay off because we have all these tremendous new capabilities just right at the tip of our fingers.
I love it. The payoff comes in doing your homework, right? It's like we're back in school, folks. Okay. But there's something else that you said, comprehensive payment strategy. What? Comprehensive payment strategy, that's a lot. I also got to say too, for the person who put Minority Report, that's the name of the movie that's out there in the chat, you get extra points. Those extra points are like that $10,000 though that Steve sent me. They may not show up or mean anything. Okay, but I want to be able to move on because something else that comes out of Minority Report is we want to know how, before somebody makes a payment, how can I actually put a faster payment in front of them? You talk comprehensive payment strategy. We were talking about the use cases. We were talking about the products. We were talking about the services. But the discussion now goes to, well, how do I actually enable businesses to work with these faster payments? How do I actually get a way to be able to use a faster payment and put it in somebody's hands, put it in front of them? Steve, I see you there. I know I'm not going to make you wait on this one. What would be your answer? Let's move that discussion over into enabling these services. What can we do? What can those attendees that are here do to start working towards, of course, you need the comprehensive payment strategy, but to start working towards actually putting faster payments in front of a customer and in their hands?
One of the things I'd like to really hit on is something that Brian said that's very important. Nobody expects faster payments, real-time payments to be all of the payments that anyone is making. And in fact, if we look at the payments that are going across the RTP network right now, I would be surprised if any of them started with a channel or a service or a product where RTP was the only option offered. It's very common if you're talking about, say, a business, that it'll be an application that's also allowing them to make wire transfers and ACH and same day ACH. They might also be offering things like, Visa or MasterCard push to card. And that's the way it should be, because the fact is you want to make sure that you're building products that are as useful as possible for your customers. And so the first thing is, think about how your customers are going to be making payments. They're not going to all of a sudden say, I want one of those brand new RTP things. In fact, to a certain extent, I tell people this all the time when folks ask, what is the clearinghouse? And I said, you've never heard of us. And if you ever see us on the news, probably something as bad has happened, because like Kim said about the plumbing, more people know about the Fed, by the way, I'm sure. But if we're in the news, it's probably because something as bad has happened, and I'm probably looking for a new job at that point. So the fact is, boring is good, but that also means that you don't have folks saying, I want an RTP. What they're saying is, I want to make a payment. So that's the way you put it in front of them. Think about like your small business or commercial portal and making it one of the options, and making it where they don't have to say, I want to do an RTP. Make it where they say, I want to move a payment. And by the way, you're offering them a faster way of doing it that's going to give them the confirmation. Think about in terms of things like your online consumer banking, giving them those account-to-account transfer options. One of the things that's been fascinating is for account-to-account is that they rarely are going out and saying, we have a new way of doing account-to-account transfer. They take folks who are doing account-to-account transfers, and if they meet certain criteria, they got, it's somebody who's on the RTP network, it just shows up as a capability. Do you want this to go immediately? Nobody says no, I'd rather wait. And so it just starts happening. And the more you can make that experience for your customer as seamless, and they're doing what they want to do, the better. Obviously, the way you do that is to go into your existing channels, that type of thing, and figure out how to make them work a little bit better. It's also going to come from talking to your customers. That doesn't mean every single one of your customer contact personnel needs to be an expert on real-time payments. But to the extent, especially with the business where I got a problem and I want to help you to help me figure it out, know how to get them to use the channel that's going to give them that result. So a little bit of internal education. Also, make sure that the folks in your branches, if someone calls in, those types of things, they know how to talk about these things with them. That's how you're going to get folks really using this to the best of the capabilities. The final thing I'll say is most banks start out receiving real-time payments. You know, that's you're hooked into the network. You'll typically start receiving those real-time payments within an hour or so because you'll be on the network and folks will want to send things to your customers. Seeing how they are getting those payments gives you a good insight. It helps to educate your customers. They're now seeing things happening faster, and they're probably going to be asking how to make other parts of their banking and payments life go a little bit faster too.
So if I heard you right, you said it's better to receive than to give, because you need to go talk to my mom. That's not what she's told me all these years, but I'd have to agree, getting started, it is better to receive before you figure out how to give. You know, something else I heard in there too is people don't know who the clearinghouse is. People a lot more know who the Fed are. But if we were to just shut down for a day, all of those, you know, barbecued backyard discussions when they come back, and we tell people what we do would be understood right away, right? Because we'd be all over the news. And I can't imagine the Fed shutting down. What I can imagine is the Fed being able to help provide us some insight in what we can do to be able to give consumers these products, put them in front of them, enable businesses to be able to have solutions that are going to be able to work for them too. And Kim, what would you say to that? What will be a way for the community banks to be able to make really good use of enabling and using these services?
Yeah, so I think Steve summarized it really well, and I think it was a great follow-on from Brian's point on needing a strategy. And all of our outreach to date is about trying to provide the resources and the education to enable both consumers, enable financial institutions to start to understand, how do I enable that consumer? How do I enable that business, that our business customer as well? And I think that's where that partnership with the ecosystem, I'll come back to that is going to be critical to doing that, along with who you rely on as a small community, whether that's, you know, whoever your partner and your processor is in that space, that it's a multifaceted approach. But I think that the other key is you've got to figure out what's the return on investment. We've talked about this for years in terms of why does this matter? And you've got to be able to equate that. And the only way that I think that you start to be able to have your own language on return on investment is to talk to your businesses and talk to your consumers. And to Steve's point, it's not about wanting RTP or Fed now. It's about, what problem am I trying to solve? But having those conversations, then you know behind the scenes, you know the tools and how to start crafting that strategy to be able to enable both consumers and businesses. So I think that's a really key point. I think another point that Steve made that I would just highlight that is really within, you know, again, the Fed's mission is we're doing this to make it work better. I think that's what you said, Steve. But to me, that we're doing this because it is more efficient. It does reduce these pain points. It will add to greater efficiency over the long run. And for all of those reasons, it's the right thing to do. So I said a lot there, and I really believe that every financial institution has to make it their own in their own words. And you do that. We can help. We help with that outreach and that education. But there's an onus on all of you as well to be doing that outreach and that talk with your, you know, with your consumers and your businesses. And I've told some of my friend bankers that I know, and say, my customers aren't asking for this. And I said, go ask your customers to bring their teenagers and their millennials into the conversation with you, because I think you'll hear a different way of speaking. I hear it with my kids already today, and I think that's an important audience. So you know, go beyond just who you might think of as your traditional financial institution customers and your friends, and reach out a little bit more broadly, cast that net a little bit wider.
Okay, you hit on a topic I'm going to have to come back to here soon, because you know, banking is changing and we need to change with it. That is a great comment who just came in, and one of the things you hit on too. I love getting the teenagers and getting the millennials involved. You know, if I can't get the TV to work correctly, I just need to find a millennial or teenager right away to be able to help me. But when it comes to help too for enabling these services, and really, you know, I hear that one of the things that came up in our early discussions too was the third companies, the technologies out there, they're enablers. They're enabling us to be able to do some of these services. What does the ICBA, what does the Faster Payments Council have that's out there to help us for working with putting these things out there, working with people? So let me start with you, Reed. The Faster Payments Council, when we look at enabling services, we look at these third-party providers, we look at education. What do you guys have that's out there?
Yeah, there are actually a couple tools that I'd like to highlight here. First of all, going back to the comments that I think everybody else made about needing to have a strategy. Well, it's easy to tell somebody you got to have a strategy. It's not as easy to help them actually build out that strategy. And a lot of great work is being done by the folks that were speaking here. The FPC, for our part, we worked with Deloitte to put together a toolkit to help our members sort of do an assessment on where are we in our readiness and what are some of the steps that we could be taking in order to get from where we are, maybe up to where we want to be in terms of implementing faster payments, in conjunction with some free consultation for our members with the Deloitte team who is specialized in this space. So that's one tool that's out there for anybody that's an FPC member. Anybody who's not an FPC member, you certainly can be. So that's one thing. And then the other one I mentioned a few minutes ago that isn't yet live yet, but it's kind of give a sneak peek to this audience, is a catalog of service providers. So you can go in and you can say, well, I'm a community bank and I want to know who are out there that serves community banks and what do they do? And you can slice it different ways to say, well, I want somebody who looks at fraud, or I want somebody who is a network, right? So looking at it through different, or maybe you can say, well, I want somebody who provides these services for RTP transactions or for Zelle transactions and so forth. And so what we think is that this is going to provide just a wonderful way for buyers and sellers of these services to find each other, right? So a one-stop shop down the road, it won't be that way at first, right? We're got to start with what we got, but down the road, the ability to go to one place and say, hey, this is a catalog of essentially everybody who provides these services. And it kind of allows each of those service providers to put their product out there for people to then find them and then contact them and figure out whether they want to do business together. So I think first, create that strategy. There are tools out there that can help you do that, including our toolkit. And then second, once you've got your strategy built, you can find some partners that can help you then sort of flesh out the different pieces of it in terms of what you need to do to actually turn it live.
You heard it here first. You get that sneak peek catalog available from the Faster Payments Council coming here soon to be able to help serve you. All right, let's go ahead and get back to the ICBA though too, because I know, Brian, you guys got resources, a lot of resources that'll be able to help people too. Can you tell us more? I believe it's your libraries, the things that you have available, of what can be done in this area to be able to help the attendees.
Yeah, sure, Kevin. So, I mean, ICBA's got a couple of different sides. We've got a bank card side, which provides services for community banks and like a lot of good tools and resources to help community banks develop digital payment strategies. And I can drop some of those links into the chat. But then there's the other side, which is the side that I'm on, which is government relations and advocacy. And that's one thing we haven't really quite touched on with the conversation so far this morning. But when you look at the big payment ecosystem, of course, one of the most important players is Washington, D.C. So part of my job, or really a very big part of my job, is to help make sense of all those developments in D.C. for community banks. So I can also send some other links that can direct viewers to all the resources that we have that explain some of the really big debates going on in DC right now. Especially in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, there has certainly been a lot more interest from policymakers in faster payments. Partly in response to stimulus programs like the economic impact payments, but also in response to some other developments as well. So my coworker Nazrin Kibria, she's got a blog all about the digital dollar. I've got one called Crypto Chronicles that examines all the developments with cryptocurrency. Now, I don't want to stray too far off the path of faster payments and go down the crypto route, but those are, of course, important developments that factor into this larger conversation. And that's why it's so important for community banks to have access to information about those developments. And it's certainly important to stay on top of those as well.
I gotta agree, but this is your captain speaking. If you would look out to the right of the aircraft, you will see Washington, D.C. We can't go by without mentioning them, but we're going to keep this flight going. And to keep this flight going, one of the things I want to reel it back in, and thank you, Brian. Actually, I am a big follower of Brian's on some of his stuff with the cryptocurrency. He's able to make it really easy to understand. So if you're not following him, get out there and start following him. I can't give him a big enough plug and enough kudos on that. Before we keep going, though, I got to let you know somebody's yelling at me in the chat because I've got an all caps response in here that I want to be able to get to. And I also want to get to one of the questions that was asked earlier that we haven't addressed yet. So I want to make sure that you guys realize if you're going to ask the question, it's going to get answered. And if there's something we haven't addressed yet, please get it in that chat. If there's something you're still wondering about, get it in that chat. We've got the experts, the industry experts represented right here. This is your chance to be able to ask them. One of the comments that came in before I get to that question is, according to a 2020 survey of consumer payment choice conducted by the Federal Reserve Bank, Go Fed, of Atlanta, 62% of consumers adopted at least one payment app. That's a lot. That's things like PayPal, Venmo, and Zelle. This kind of goes back to that comment Kim was saying. Are they asking for faster payments? The data says they are. I mean, nobody just comes in and goes, hello, I would like faster payments, please. No, that's not how it happens. It's their usage. It's their activities. It's their habits. That's what's showing it. This was actually a thing. Again, 62% adopted it. It was up from 54%. That's a huge significant increase. Okay. So we know that they're asking for it, the way they're asking for it. There's a lot out there. We can probably get those statistics, that information shared with you too. That brings the question a lot that we need to talk about as far as how do you know if they're really asking for it. But the thing that came up that I want to make sure it addressed is it has to do with settlement. And there's a lot of concerns with settlement. You know, a lot of us on this call, we work on the back end, and we've got to make sure things work on the back end, that operations is able to process everything. So panel folks, the question was simply enough, how will transactions settle in a 24/7, 365 world? I almost want to bring in MIB to be able to address this one a little bit too. You know, how will you guys be able to help address this as well? So again, I'm going to throw it out to everybody, but let's look a little bit more in the settlement process in a 24/7, 365 world with all these different systems. What's it going to mean? Who wants it?
Well, I can jump in there first, Kevin. Okay, so you mentioned MIB, and absolutely we will be very engaged in settlement, just like we always have been with all of the traditional payment rails. We are currently a funding agent for RTP. We have banks live on that, so we're active there. We are one of those 120 participants in the FedNow pilot, very engaged in that process. We have been engaged since, goodness, 2015 when Fed first started having roundtables, and that turned into the Faster Payments Task Force and the Secure Payments Task Force, and evolved into serving as an advisory member to the clearinghouse. So MIB is very much involved. As we've gone through the process and looked to see what needs are out there for community banks, we know that this after hours question is huge for them. How do we staff for this? How do we make certain that we know what's happening? And as the funding agent in the settlement role, we can do that for you. And that is our plan, to take care of our shareholders, our customers, by being there at all hours to monitor activity, to make certain that your liquidity is found for the activity that needs to pass through and process on behalf of your customers. So rest assured, that is one of our primary focuses, and we are working with tools for the control system, in fact, to manage through reconciliations and all of those things that are very different in a faster payments world. So that's the MIB side of that, but I'm sure others are excited to talk about that aspect as well. Yeah. It is a new world.
Well, you said reconciliation and excitement in the same sentence. Wow. Points for that one. Also, I want to give points to Brian and Reed. They're neck and neck as in who's given the most links on useful resources that you'll have after this. But Steve, what do you got to say about 24/7, 365 settlement?
Yeah, one of the things I do want to point out is the essential role of funding agents and MIB. You know, we are very happy to have you doing that. Even more important overall is that early on, we came up with an idea of how funding agents would operate. We thought it was a lovely idea. And on our advisory committee, where Sheila's been serving since the beginning, we were politely told that that would be nice if it weren't for how things really work in the real world. And so Sheila and others were on a group that helped us figure out how to actually do it in real life, and we really appreciate that. And so, and I think that what this does show, though, is that you need a whole lot of folks working on this, because folks are going to, you know, the folks who are closest to the customers, to the banks, are going to have some ideas that we need to make sure that we incorporate. And so, but just in general, what the idea of a funding agent is that when you're settling real-time payments, they are happening over the weekends, and you need to be able, you don't want your customers to run, because you've run out of settlement capacity, you don't want them to not be able to make the payments. The funding agents are able to make sure that that liquidity is there to keep things moving and allocated efficiently among their members. And so it's a really important thing. These payments do settle in real time. They're done. And in fact, one of the things about reconcilement is, if you're familiar with reconciling things like, you know, ACH or checks, or really to a certain extent even wires, it's a different process, because every payment, and this would be both RTP and FedNow, every payment you get that confirmation back. So reconcilement is really making sure that there aren't any things that fall between the cracks. It's a different process. It does need to be done. And so hopefully the tools are there. And again, folks like MIB are really helping folks a lot with that type of part of stuff. So it's a different kind of processing, because real time 24/7, it's just, that's not what we're used to doing.
And it is different in real time 24/7. And there's also a lot of ways to be looking at this and preparing for this too. Reed, Kim, would you like to join in and mention to people, hey, 24/7, 365 settlement process, what's it going to mean to the future of payments and to anybody who starts working in the faster world? In fact, Kim, how about I let you go first on this one?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. So from a Fed perspective, and the settlement will occur in master accounts or designated correspondent. Critical to that, though, so I think Sheila really covered that well in terms of, you know, all the other things that have to be done around the edges, if you will, for lack of a better word, to make all that happen. I think the other point, and this, again, this was feedback we received, we are building in a liquidity management tool within the FedNow service to allow the movement of funds out of your master account to a joint account or to whomever during off hours when FedWire isn't available. And I think that will be important and essential, because it is new territory. We're still learning. I don't know, you know, I think Steve and RTP will pave the way for trying to trend volumes and what you're seeing in off hours and all of that can be informative as financial institutions jump off on this. But I think it's critical that we have multiple capabilities to allow financial institutions to manage their funds as efficiently and as effectively as they can. So another resource that is really helpful is the Fed has recently published an operations readiness guide, and that goes into really great detail on settlement and optionality within that I think will help financial institutions prepare much more.
All right, the Fed readiness guide. You better get ready here, Reed. I'm going to be coming up to you in a second, but we might want to make sure that people have a way of getting to that Fed readiness guide too. So if we can get a link shared on that one, join in on the competition between Reed and Brian on getting some useful links and resources out there and made available. I'm sure Sheila and Donna are going to have a lot of this compiled for you to get sent out when we're all done, because we don't want you to have to spend too much time focusing on just getting the links, because this is some great conversation. And Reed, are you ready? What are we going to do in a 24/7, 365 environment?
Yeah, you know, I don't know that I have a ton to add that the others haven't covered. I think they've covered all the really important things. And I think what I would highlight is this is one of the questions that everybody who's here should be thinking about if they haven't already implemented instant payments through the clearinghouse, if they're thinking about that, or if they're thinking about FedNow, because that is, in a lot of ways, the biggest change that's going to occur within your organization is going from banking hours to 24/7, 365. So I guess my only value add here is just to highlight that is an absolutely critical question and something that has to be understood before you make the leap.
Yeah. By the way, if anybody wants to hazard a guess what the peak period for payments on RTP network is today? Anybody?
Oh, that'd be a good poll question right there. What is the peak period for payments? Anybody want to put guesses out there in the chat? What would you think? I know Steve knows the answer. He's going to give it to us. Right? Nobody wants to play along. So what is it, Steve?
8:00 p.m. on Friday night, which just illustrates the fact that this is not your dad's Oldsmobile a payment system. It's just 8:00 p.m. Friday nights is when we hit our peak, and 8:00 every night, in fact. So
8:00 every night. Now, is there a reason for that? Because is that like the close of happy hour?
Is there a reason for that? I'm sure there is. Do I know the reason for that? No.
Wow, that one would be one that'd be great to know. All right, everybody, I want you to know now we're starting to make that initial descent. We're going to have everybody coming around to make sure that we pick up anything that you've left behind. That means put those questions in the chat. In fact, we got a couple of topics to still discuss. We're going to have every one of our panelists give their closing comments as we get to the end. So panelists, you better start getting ready for that. I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to want your closing comments. But we have a couple of big topics that, you know, I don't want to run out of time on, but we might. So while you're out there, here's a couple of topics for you to think about. We have, will people actually use it? Is there any statistics? Is there any data to help us know that yes, people will use it? Is there anything we should look at to know that yes, people will use it? But on the other side too, as we're looking at moving forward, what's this going to mean to existing stuff? Will this cannibalize? Will this take away from the stuff that we're using? So attendees, we're here for you. We're here to answer your questions. If you look at those two topics, taken away from my existing systems, cannibalizing my existing systems, or are people really going to use it? Is there anything that'll show me that I really need this, that'll give me concrete evidence? What would you want to have answered? What area would you like to have the conversation go? So again, make use of that chat. I know you're probably all going, both. We want to have both. And let me see. I'm in the mood for cannibalization or complementing, because Brian, you mentioned earlier the strategy, how strategy plays into growth and adoption. What are your thoughts of when you start looking at the existing payment systems and you start looking in the complementing of or cannibalization of faster payments? What's it really going to do? Is it going to sit there and it's going to say, hey, it's going to take away, or it's going to add to what you're doing based on being somebody I know who really looks at other countries, really looks at research? You even mentioned the flavors of faster payments earlier. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, there's like the classic line at any sort of payment conference that in the entire history of the US economy, we've never retired a payment system. It's true. It's true. I mean, the wire system dates back decades. Credit cards, they first came about in the 1950s. You know, we're still using these things, and we have every reason to believe that that is going to continue to be the case as we move forward. Yes, we're going to see new systems. Yes, we're going to see consumers and businesses change their behaviors to integrate these new systems, but that doesn't mean that everything else is going to go away. And so again, that's why it's so important for a community bank to have a comprehensive strategy. And, you know, again, you know, just to emphasize the point, you know, this is not something that you need to do alone. You know, look to associations like ICBA, look to all the partners. There's so many resources out there. It's just a matter of finding them. It's quite easy to find them. I mean, we've got them all like collected there on that page that I shared. But then working to understand them. And working with all the different partners you have, not only within the institution, because it's really important to break those silos, right? Get the ACH folks in the same room with the card folks and the executives, get them talking, but talk to your partners, right? Talk to your FedRep, talk to your core, right? That it's really conversations and education. That's really what's going to propel the future of faster payments.
Well, I keep hearing partnerships. I keep hearing education, this and strategy. That must be important. But again, okay, we're looking at strategy. We're looking at growth. We're looking at adoption. Reed, what do you think? Is it going to be cannibalization? Is it going to be complementing the systems? What do I need to be looking at? What's consumer behavior really telling me to?
Yeah, I think, I like to be the one who doesn't answer the question. So I think, is it going to be one or the other? I think it's going to be some of both, right? So I think, and to Brian's point, there are lots of different payment systems and types out there, right? So there are cards, there's wire, there's ACH, but there's also checks, there's also cash. I don't know how many bankers are really loving checks these days. So to the extent RTP or FedNow or something else is going to cannibalize the check volume, maybe that's a good thing. In fact, I would submit that it probably isn't mostly a good thing for most folks, including your account holders. I don't think many account holders love checks either. They use them because they need to for various things. Take our cash, maybe cash is fine, right? It's not negatively impacting you as a financial institution, but when a customer is using cash, are they engaging with you as a bank? No, they're just handing a piece of paper from one person from themselves to somebody else. So they're not using your online banking. They're not engaging with you. You don't have any mind share in that. And I think that raises up a sort of fundamental question beyond whether or not they're going to cannibalize your payments if you do it, because other people are going to do it, right? We talked earlier, I think the stat was 62% of people adopted something last year. Those people are adopting things like PayPal and Square Cash, the Cash App, and Venmo, things that in a way are wired around the relationship with the financial institution instead of being integrated into it. And so people are going to find a way to do the things they want to do. I think the trick here is making sure that they find a way to do it with you.
I gotta agree. I mean, that's great though. As the payments professor though, I'm taking points away for dodging the question. So, that's going to be a mark on your exam on this case. Okay. But, hey, let's look at the Fed too, because Fed, I know that you're one of those that you're looking at what's happening in all of our channels. You do the triennial report. That's something I look forward to on seeing what are the trends, what's happening. And as you're moving forward with Fed now, what are your predictions on, is it going to complement our existing systems, or is it going to actually cannibalize and take away from some of our existing systems?
Yeah, well, Professor, I hate to disappoint you, but you're going to dock me on points too. So I think it will be both. I think out of the gate, it's absolutely going to complement. I think Brian's point, we say that all the time too, right? That we've never retired a payment system in the United States. That's something to think about. There were a lot of reasons when we think about instant payments and a lot of features and functionalities that we tried to take pain points from existing payment services and build into a faster payment solution. So the rich data that you get from a check, that has been built in, especially with an ISO 20022. That capability for that rich data is there. So that's a pain point that you hope you can start to overcome and continue to probably see that decrease in check. I think some of this will evolve though, and I think it's yet to be seen, because obviously we haven't even launched Fed now, but we know within the data that we have that there are payments that run across different rails that might more efficiently run across other rails. It's not necessarily ours to say, why is that? I think that's again where financial institutions are going to have to be thoughtful and intentional about doing exactly what Brian said. Get everybody in the room, all the different payments folks, and think about what behaviors do you want to drive. Some of them will be done to you. End users do make a choice and they insist on that. Environmentals change. Look at the pandemic and how we've seen, the payment forms and choices change during the pandemic. All of those things will be variables. But I think the essential piece is understanding your data, understanding what's running across which rail, understanding what your point of view is, and again, what you're hearing from your end user or your business, and trying to be intentional about driving that volume. That's my epic kind of vision or ideal state of mind, that if we could do that collectively, I think we would drive the end results that we really want to see. And I think those end results, we have to work together to say, what does that look like and why do we have that? So I expect that we'll continue to seek the public's feedback again on state of different payment methods as faster and instant payments becomes more adopted and becomes more of a force within the broader payments ecosystem.
Okay, I got to give you points on that. As a really good answer. In fact, I would have to say if there was a payments professor debate club, you would definitely be in it. And one thing that's not up for debate is some of the data that we do see that is happening and is working. And that's where I want to go over to Steve and say, Steve, with RTP, And if we consider cannibalize versus complement, you had mentioned gig in industry and how we're seeing even more payments, or even, I think you've talked to me about pay on demand. So is it complementing or is it cannibalizing? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to say I got a little bit nervous when you said you had a taste for cannibalization. So I hope we've cleared that up. But this is one of those fascinating things, is that, as Kim mentioned, it's the consumers and the customers' choices that are going to end up driving this. And so we had folks who would typically have been paid maybe once a week, maybe even once every 2 weeks, whether they're, you know, the Grubhub driver, whether they're the first, someone working a retail shift, and they can now demand to be paid whenever they want. And we're already getting an inkling and talking to some of the folks who are doing this that they're getting many, many more payments than they would otherwise. And so it's not just a matter of is there one ACH payment replaced by one RTP payment. It could be a dozen or, you know, a number of them. And so that's one of the things that's going to make this even more interesting to look at. We're seeing already starting to get an inkling of this in business to business payments. Very common for businesses to say, I'm going to pay half a dozen invoices to this one vendor at one time. But if you look at one of the reasons why businesses want to use things like RTP to make payments, it's that ability to really fine tune their cash flow when they have the funds and they can make the payment, then they could say on that due date. They also like the fact that they can reduce the difficulty of reconcilement. If you look at the cost that many businesses have, it's not just the cost of the payment, but the cost of that reconcilement. And to the extent that you can get that one-to-one kind of correlation, we're getting an inkling. There's still not enough statistics on this, but that there are folks looking at maybe having more of those business-to-business payments, especially if they can be done in a very quick and efficient way. And so these kind of things are going to be happening. And what the net result is, I think, is going to be surprising. I do think we'll have more overall payments. We did a study recently. We asked a firm to go out and go and look around the world at what happened when they went to real-time payments. And you look at places like the UK. Interestingly enough, none of them showed an actual reduction in the number of ACH payments, even ACH credits. But what we found was that there seemed to be more payments going on overall. There are reductions in checks going on around the world. We're seeing that in the US anyway. Probably would be accelerated when there's an option like RTP. But the fact is that these things are happening on a much bigger stage. And it's not just, I got a payment, it can replace this one. It's how are the customers actually making the payments? How many are they going to make? And the ability to make a payment immediately, are they going to make more of them?
Okay, that's cool. More of them. You mentioned data, statistics, study. And one of the things that we're well, we're not going to have time to discuss is looking more into the data and what the data says and shows that you've got a demand for faster payments you may not see. In fact, I'm going to give everybody homework because I am the payments professor, and that's one of the things I do. And your homework is you need to get with Sheila. You need to have a conversation with her, because I've had this conversation with her, and she'll tell you what you can do to go look at your data. She can share some data she's got too that is screaming and yelling that you guys, you've got this demand. But it is time for final comments. All right, panelist, we're going to come to you now. I'm going to actually start ladies first, because I know, Kim, you wanted to mention a little bit more about a previous comment, but in that, this is your chance. And I'm only going to give you about 2 minutes most each, maybe not even that long. Let's make it 90 seconds. What do you want to leave everybody with? What is the final comments you have when it comes to faster payments? You better know this. Let's go with the Fed. Kim?
Ooh, all the pressure, Professor. So lean in. I think that's what you've heard here. Develop a strategy, educate yourself, activate, rely on your partners. I love this panel today because I love the perspective that Reed and Brian and Steve have brought. And I see it as such a complementary effort across all of these parties. And everybody's playing a unique and a distinct piece in ensuring that we will, implement instant payments to the best of our ability and as quickly as possible in the United States for the betterment of our economic state and our end users. And I just cannot reiterate that enough, but I think you've heard so many different themes that I hope are beneficial. I did clarify that the Ops Readiness Guide from the Fed was previewed with the FedNow community. That's a 1,300 member community. If you're not part of it, you should be. It is a great opportunity to broadly, again, educate yourself and understand the different resources and help you develop those strategies along with your partners so that you can be ready and be successful as we go forward. I'll leave it at that. I probably parroted a lot of the comments that others have said, but I really compliment my fellow panelists here and you, Professor, because I think it's been a really well coordinated session today.
Oh, thank you. Compliments like that will get you extra credit. But it's time to move on to our superhero of payments. And our superhero of payments, he's the Superman of ICBA. Brian, what are the things you want to close with in 90 seconds or less?
Of course, I will echo what Kim said. FedNow community it's a great resource, super simple to sign up. It's a great way for community bankers to stay on top of all the developments with that system. As for all the other developments, ICBA is your trusted resource. Community bankers, I know it can be difficult to stay on top of all the news, all the developments, but that's what I do. That's what I do. We put out like lots of articles, lots of different resources. So we're trying to make it as simple as possible for community banks to get the information they need when they need it to be able to do what they do best.
Okay, I love it. That's excellent. All right, but it's time for some facts. We have 2 people left. Which one am I going to go with first? Reed, I want to hear from you. All right, Faster Payments Council, you guys have been doing a lot. You got the work groups, you got the papers, everything that's out there. What are your closing comments to everybody of, hey, this is what you need to be thinking of. This is what you need to be looking at as you're moving into the wonderful world of faster payments?
Yeah, I think I'm going to circle back to something I said, I think at the very first, when I started talking an hour and a half ago, which is it's really important that you not only have conversations, it's critical that you have conversations with your bankers bank and with the community banks that you're partnering with and that you might view as peers, but it is equally as important that you find forums like the Faster Payments Council, but also other forums that enable you to have that dialogue across the different segments that you're trying to navigate here, that you're trying to serve. So a forum that allows for you to interact with business users, with different technology providers, with the networks, and with even consumers. And finding that can really help you understand why this ultimately is going to be so important to you in a way that maybe you wouldn't understand if you're only talking within the banking community.
Okay, I love it. This is great conversation. And today's valedictorian of the session is actually Steve. I've been keeping score for points that don't count, but it was the $10,000 payoff that has given you the chance to come in here last and tell everybody, what do they need to be doing? What are the things that you want to leave everyone with when it comes to the world of faster payments?
Yes, of course. First, I want to mention something that came up in an FPC panel the other day, which I think is important. One of the panelists had gone out and talked to a bunch of early adopters of faster payments and asked them, were your customers asking it? And the pretty much universal answer that he got back was they weren't asking for it, they were expecting it. And that's a huge difference. The second thing is you right now are looking at 6 people, all of whom want to help you figure out how to get real-time payments to your customers. We all want to help you, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens more. So talk to really everybody who's already involved in the way you deliver products and services, those who you rely on today, the MIB, the ICBA, the Faster Payments Council, the Fed, ourselves, and just make sure that you're moving forward and taking advantage of all of the folks who really want to help you get there.
Way to bring us in on a very nice soft landing there. As we're approaching the gate, folks, you still got a second or two, couple minutes. If you've got any dying questions you want to have answered, put them out there. I want you to know that working with MIB has been great. Working with this panel has just been a pleasure. I love working with these guys in the industry. These are the top players. And I know MIB is looking at a couple of conferences next year, possibly bringing the superheroes of payments back together. So let's hope that happens. Let's mark our calendars for that to happen. Anything else? Am I missing anything, Sheila, Donna?
I just jump in here, Kevin, and say thank you to everyone. This is indeed an esteemed panel. I keep good company, and we appreciate you very much. Our customers on the line, we very much appreciate you joining us. Remember, it is a journey. You are on a journey. There are some steps along the way, but we're all here to come alongside you in this journey, because it is indeed an exciting time for payments. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Sheila, and thank you all for attending. For now, class dismissed.